Welcome to Fleet News Group podcast. I'm Caroline Falls, your regular host, but today I'm introducing my editor Marc Sibbald, who talks with Jonny Parker, CEO and founder of Thundergrid in New Zealand. Marc caught up with Jonny on the sidelines of the listed company EROAD's annual Fleet Day, held in Christchurch in late February. It's a great chat about how NZ followed the Norwegian model to support EV adoption and how now EVs are going to help power New Zealand.
All right, Jonny, thanks for being a guest on our podcast series today. I watched and listened to your presentation at the EROAD Fleet Day, and I was really intrigued about the language you used, talking about the grid and the challenges we face with EVs. Just to start, can you tell us a little bit about Thundergrid and how it became the business it is today?
Sure, yeah. So at Thundergrid, we're basically here to protect the grid. So we are an EV charging infrastructure business, but we want to be part of the solution and not adding to a coming problem. So there's a bit of a coming problem in the sense that we have a grid made up of high voltage lines that then move into low voltage lines as they get towards houses. And as we electrify more vehicles through the country and we electrify heating through the country, the demand on that grid is going to increase. And so if you have a situation like a winter peak where everyone's running heating and that coincides when everyone's plugging in their EVs, you're very likely to have brownouts on the grid. You know, it's likely to tip over transformers, and it's also likely to cause fuse trips in the homes or even on the power pole. So what we're trying to do at Thundergrid is get ahead of that problem. So we're trying to connect all EV charging load so it can play part of the solution and not only flex in regards to market mechanisms or in regards to availability of power, but also flex dynamically in terms of having local control points on the grid that automate how EV charging can be flexed. So the idea is if you get home, switch on the lights, switch on the oven, plug your EV in, it doesn't all have to come on at the same time. The EV can be managed, and likewise, if you have a scenario where it's a winter peak on the network, everyone's running their heating, you can dial down the EV chargers to compensate until that peak has moved through and people have gone to bed, and then you can dial up the EV charging. So there's a bigger reason as well, which is energy equity. So one thing we're mindful of is that if we do not smartly manage coming load, the grid will need to be reinforced and built a lot bigger, and that comes at a cost to every energy user, whether they have EV or not.
Maybe, yeah, that's really interesting. From a New Zealand point of view, the energy, where does it come from? Is it hydro? Is it solar? Or is it brown? Where does the energy come from?
So it's a mixture depending on the availability of renewables on the grid. So New Zealand's generally around 84% renewable at the moment, in the sense that it has wind, it has hydro, it has geothermal, but the availability of that varies. So one thing that can vary is, say, meltwater into the lakes, which drive the hydro. So if it's particularly cold, that meltwater stays as ice, as snow, and the lakes get lower because they're using hydro to produce the power. And then that is what forces the market to put on coal. So that's when we start burning coal as base load, and it's when we start using things such as gas peaker plants to generate electricity to supplement the renewables on the grid. So that's when our emissions go up.
So just talking about grids, my understanding is that electricity typically goes one way. Like as you said, you have your power station, whether it's hydro, wind or solar, it leaves that facility and goes into your house or your business. What you're talking about is having it go both ways and also having it go into a car and then come back out of a car and move around. Is that what the grid will do in the future?
In the future, we think so. So at the moment, we're looking primarily to just dial down the EV charging load, so not back inject into the grid at this point. But there is technology coming that will enable EVs to basically harmonize the grid by also injecting into the grid when need be. And that's called bidirectional energy flow. And it also means that we're entering a paradigm where the nature of what is a grid changes from being we've got a big energy producer here, over here, and then up far away we've got all our energy users there and a big complex system in between. what we'll probably end up with is virtual power plants, which could be a home with an EV of a significant battery that can actually inject when the grid needs it. So that's probably where we're going.
So that's probably going to place a lot of pressure on the poles and wires, and as well as a challenge for the automotive industry, it sounds like the electricity industry's got quite a bit to do to get ready for it as well.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and it's coming fast. And a lot of the biggest risk sits in the low voltage network, which is the lines that are managed locally by your local network. So you might have a Vector or a Wellington Electricity or an Orion. They look after the power poles and transformers. And so if everyone's latching on a lot of EVs and a lot of load in that area, they're going to need the means to manage that load. Otherwise, they're going to have to build bigger cables, bigger power poles, bigger fuses very fast. And it's likely they can't keep up. So we need to get ahead and make it smart immediately.
Yeah, excellent. During your presentation, you mentioned a term that I hadn't heard before, but I think it's really cool: energy analytics. It seems like a new term that fleet managers are having to learn or familiarise themselves with. What is energy analytics?
So it relates to the electricity use within your facility or site. So if you're about to add lots of EVs to your facility, you want to make sure they're fully charged when they're used. So a good place to start to figure out, do I have the power, is to look at your electricity data and conduct analytics for it. So you're starting to look at the electricity data and figure out, well, what is the maximum power that I'm using each day? Then also checking it against, well, what's the maximum I'm allowed each day? So you can check it against your fuse rating that's on the switchboard, see how the power is being used, and from that you can ascertain what is the spare power that I can now offer to EVs. And you might find you don't have any, or you might find that you've got some, but it's only in evenings. And so that's the purpose of analytics, is to show when do you have the spare power and how much can you charge with it.
It sounds like fleet managers are going to have to learn a new skill then. Like analytics isn't something we're that strong at as a profession, and now we're going to learn electricity and analytics. So
it's a good. I think it's something that can be they could outsource. So you can have someone look at the energy data, and all the electricity companies could help. But yeah, it's something to, I think, understand. But they wouldn't necessarily have to produce it themselves. It could be they get an expert, and the expert can then show them, this is how you're using power, and this is the spare capacity band that you're operating. And then it just helps them to interpret what that means. And I think the real magic then comes into knowing the control systems of EVs, what you can do with that band. And that's where some external expertise are quite helpful in the form of EV infrastructure specialists or energy consultants.
Yeah, excellent. It's been a really enjoyable day here at the EROAD Fleet Day. And coming from Australia, we thought New Zealand was so far ahead with EVs and fleet. We've had a very poor government policy for a number of years, and we're really just starting to gain momentum now. What's your view of fleets and EV adoption in New Zealand? Are they streaming ahead, or are they still just taking small steps?
Great question. Yeah, it's kind of flipped. I mean, I think New Zealand was leading the way. It was doing a lot to encourage the uptake, modelling itself on the Norwegian model, a very similar country by nature, and it was steaming ahead of Australia in that sense, whilst it was held back for a while. But now we've had the government sort of pulled back support. They've removed the discount scheme, introducing the road user charges. So that was always going to happen at some point, but it's come in coincidence with higher cost of capital, and that has slowed down the ability at which people can buy EVs and introduce their fleet. So we're probably predicting for the next 6 months or so there will be a lag occur in the amount of EVs being imported and the amount of infrastructure going in. But then we're anticipating, as those rates recover and the government currently here gets back behind the helm and starts realising it does need to get behind this, we'll probably see about 6 months from now a sudden traffic jam where everyone needs EVs, where everyone needs infrastructure. So it's just unfortunate that these political blips happen and cause a bit of a traffic jam, but it's it's just part of the process.
Yeah. One of the other speakers mentioned these challenges, and what's been happening. They also hinted towards the government pivot towards infrastructure, maybe spending a bit more in infrastructure rather than giving the grants for the vehicles. Is that something that's happening?
It's something we're still waiting for more detail on from the government. So I think they're currently waiting for recommendations to come from the Ministry of Transport to the Minister. We're certainly hopeful that it will be a funding or infrastructure package that supports a broad range of EV charging. We're quite concerned if it would all go into fast public charging, because generally there's already a lot of people commercially operating in that space. You've got now BP and Z Energy, highly capitalized companies doing it anyway. So the question is, do they need the subsidies? It might be better that the subsidies go towards smoothing out the connection process in which those are brought on. But also we're hopeful that with the 10 to 12,000 EV charger pledge from National, we hope that ensures some funding or support to enable people to adopt smart charging as opposed to be reliant on public charging. We want to encourage people to charge at home, at the office, rather than queuing up and causing pressure on public charging. And that way we will also be able to connect and manage that load if there's a subsidy program done correctly. So we're very keen to see what the government has in mind. We want to put forward that vision that actually we think the dollars spent would be better in encouraging people to adopt smart charging technology and have it operated at a grid level. And that will help alleviate the current problem. Also, it aligns with the reality. 85% of EV owners do not charge every day at public charging stations. They charge at home. They charge at the office. This is where it's convenience-based. You don't need a fuel Bowser experience anymore.
Yeah, fantastic. So just one last question, and I might put you on the spot here because I forgot to pre-qualify. Are you an EV owner? Do you?
Yeah. No, I had a Nissan Leaf, which I got back in 2015, imported from Japan. Very small range battery. It was kind of had been hammered by a lot of quick charging in its time, but we ran that for years and years. And just last year we bought a Tesla for the company, and that's been amazing. And it's doing some serious case. It's doing 160 kilometers a day, and it's been pretty bulletproof. So, and we don't worry about it anymore. We used to, have to hire an EV, but now we can drive all around the country with confidence that we'll be able to charge, and it's great.
Fantastic. Jonny, thanks very much for your time, and thanks for taking the time out to talk during this busy day for you. And thank you.
Awesome. Cheers, Mark. Thanks.
You've been listening to Fleet News Group podcast. It was edited and produced by Isabella Fiorentino. You can follow us on Spotify. Just search for Fleet News Group. We're also on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. Our website is fleetnewsgroup.com, where you can get all of our stories, videos and podcasts. Until next time, drive safely and take care.